The following programming is sponsored by Mark J. Bernstein. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or Beasley Media Group. Entrepreneur, founder, author, and financial advisor Mark Bernstein helps high-performing business owners turn their visions into reality. Through his innovative work and the Forward Focus forums, Mark connects entrepreneurs to resources that fuel their success. Founders Forum is a radio show and podcast where entrepreneurs share their journeys, revealing the lessons they've learned and the stories behind their success. Join Mark and his guests for a mix of inspiration, valuable insights, and a little fun. Now, let's dive in.
Good morning, America. How are you? I'm Mark Bernstein. This is Founders Forum, and we're broadcasting today out of sunny Southwest Florida on 103.9, B103.9 on HD2 Radio and many other stations, and we're on Podcast USA. And we'll also be returning soon to WWDB, also part of Beasley Media Group in Philadelphia in short order. So today our guest is David Lopez, and I'll introduce him more formally in a minute. And we also have Sam Maddula in the studio because we often do two shows together, and we're going to do two shows this morning with these two gentlemen. And so they'll both be in attendance for each other's show, so I'll sign in with both of them. Good morning, Sam, too.
Morning. How are you?
Morning, Mark.
Good morning, guys. So, the topic of the day that I'm thinking about is abundance. And on the other show, we're going to talk about abundance, but here we're going to talk about maybe lack of or people's feeling of constraint. And, you know, one of the reasons I was thinking about this morning because my wife sent me a little text about matcha tea. And I'm a drinker of matcha tea. I'm not a coffee drinker, so I drink it, and I think it's got a lot of great health benefits. But she warned me that supply is getting short because in Japan they're not drinking as much; they're drinking less matcha tea and other things from around the world. But world demand is getting very large, and so the supplies are short. So she said, "You better stock up. You know, there's not going to be enough." And I thought, ooh, it's like I'm feeling constrained about this, you know. So I am going to stock up, but. But I think there's a lot of constraint around. One of the things is tariffs. You know, this whole issue of tariffs and taxes and things that are going to happen, and people feel that, I think like they're missing out on something, they're going to lose something, or things are going to cost more, which is a constraint. So, and you guys both have had businesses where I think could be affected by that kind of thinking. I know you have to overcome it. So, I just wanted to get your input, starting with you, David, about abundance or lack thereof, and what you think about the tariff situation and perception of it.
I think the tariffs overall, like you said, the first thing they're going to do is, in my view, they're going to limit some competition, right? So you do put constraints on supply immediately because, as things get more expensive, at least in my industry, there's a lag between when you you get awarded a project and when you're actually building it, right? So for us, price changes have a major impact on the jobs that you bid 6 months ago or 12 months ago. So prices for us are going to go up. Supply overall will be limited. There's a plus on my side, though, because we have a little bit of the ability to pick different shapes in the steel industry. So if one is constrained, I can kind of shift somewhere else. So for us, the big concern is obviously going to be how high do prices go. Right. If you're a company and you have 10 competitors and then tomorrow you have 2 competitors, you're going to raise your price because you can, right? So there's a little bit of that, but so far we haven't seen that. It's all time, right?
But what I do like is you see some opportunity in what could come out of it as well, which is, so you're looking at, it's not just a one-sided deal. Like,
correct.
Be fearful of. Right?
I think overall, our prices obviously go up with prices. So there's a little bit of a lag from the jobs we got awarded. But then, when things stabilize, we kind of gain some of that back. It's just understanding, you got to pay attention to futures, what's happening down the road. And at least in business, you can't focus on what's happening today and then think that that's what's going to happen tomorrow. It's really foresight, understanding what the markets did before and what they're going to do in the future.
Yep. Very good. Sam, your thoughts?
Regarding abundance, I think people are hurting right now. I just took an Uber here, and I think it cost probably 25% more than it cost me in the past. And I think when it comes to business, I've been through a down cycle before, like the '09, GF, great financial crisis. And I think what you can do is like hold tight, put your head down and work hard and try to ride the storm out. You just need to do more with less, and the best companies will survive. And the ones that are not lean and mean, unfortunately, are going to go under. So it's kind of a stress test.
So what I got out of that, it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with it.
Exactly,
right?
100%.
Very good. Thank you. So David Lopez is founder and president of DL Metal Design, DL Steel Services, and Elevation Metals, Trust Building Company, and Illuma Sky LLC. And he is out of the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, which is, by the way, did you fly from Punta Gorda?
I did not come into Punta Gorda. I went into St. Pete from Allentown.
Oh, you did? Okay, yeah. From Allentown. Because I fly from Allentown to Punta Gorda, which is very convenient for us. Anyway, so David is the founder of DL Metal Design and a seasoned leader in the steel industry since 1997. He started as a beam line operator and worked his way up. I think that's really interesting. Eventually managing teams responsible for over $400 million in revenue. With a career spanning executive roles and industry leadership, David values the mentors who shaped him along the way. Outside of work, he's passionate about coaching youth sports and enjoys hiking, biking, traveling with his wife and kids. He has a BS in business management from Northeastern University in Boston, right?
Yep. And
David brings experience, leadership, and a love for teamwork to everything he does. So it's great to have you here this morning.
Thank you very much, Mark.
And so just tell me about your start, because I know you didn't start out like at the top of the heap.
Correct.
You were a welder, if I'm not mistaken.
So, if you go back to essentially the beginnings, I would say it's my parents. Kind of gave me that personality of hard work. I was the first generation to go to college, and during one of those college breaks, my brother, who was a Marine and then came out and became a welder, said, "Hey, listen, why don't you come work with me on your breaks? You'll make more money. You'll learn a trade." So back in 1997, I did that. Started as a beamline operator, and the owner of that company said, "Hey, I want to take you through every aspect of this business. I want to teach you how to weld, and then go into shop operations, go into estimating, and then eventually become a project manager."
So you were fortunate to have that mentor.
Yes. And
you mentioned that it's one of the things that you're grateful about. And what happened from there? You were working for a couple of companies.
So I became a project manager there about the age of 21, managing jobs somewhere in the $1 to $2 million range, top end. Over time, you get smarter. I was probably being underpaid.
Right.
So in a little bit of research, I then moved to Philadelphia. Got a pretty quick raise moving into that market, and then became a PM for another firm. And in the midst of that, there was a gentleman who worked for a general contractor who we worked for, who said, "Hey, I got a friend, comes from a long family business. They want to really get into the ornamental world. He needs a good project manager and estimator. There's kind of starting this new division." And I went and met that person over multiple meetings. We came to an agreement, and that's when I went into ornamental metals, which is kind of what my company does.
What you're in.
Correct.
Right? That's where the metal design part comes in.
And over a span of about 11 years, between me and the owner, we had about 3 or 4 support staff in that office. In 11 years, we had 60, and I would say that was probably close to a $50 million business unit.
And you eventually left that company, correct?
I did. For many reasons, as you grow, you get smarter. I think in the metal side of the world, the person that mentored me there was probably one of the smartest people when it comes to metalwork that I've ever met. So, the foundation he gave me there. Culturally, we were not in the same world, for argument's sake. So at that point, as I got to a specific point in the company, I was a chief operating officer in my early 30s there. And at some point we decided it was time to part ways, and I went and left that company.
And that's when you started your company?
It isn't.
I actually knew the answer to that.
So I took a few months off, enjoyed my family and my kids, took a cruise. But, I couldn't sit still for long. So I did find a job with another company. They were interested in getting into New York City. So they had never gone into the New York market. Knew that I had spent quite a few years there. So I came into that company as the VP of New York markets to open up the New York market for them.
And then?
So after that, we did open up New York. It's a very, very viable market for them at this point. There's a point in your life where I always wanted to start businesses. To be honest with you, the first business I started was a Quiznos sub in Philadelphia.
No kidding. No kidding.
And it was $100,000 lesson on what not to do when you're starting a business.
Gotcha. That's some of the best education.
It was very good education. So I always knew that I wanted to do that, and I always talked about it. But I had a good executive job, right? So, at that point, I had started a family. I had kids. There's an expectation of what you are creating that life, Right. So when I left that first company, I had an opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to start my own thing. But when this opportunity to open up the New York market came up, you have to weigh the options, the risk involved in starting your own business, right? You could lose everything versus, a solid executive position to open up a market that you're very comfortable with. So I went that way with aspirations of, being or having the opportunity to get to a certain level of that company and making certain types of money. Right. And that's why I went there.
Why did you eventually leave there?
So I would say we were 2 to 3 years in with that company, and I started my own design and engineering business. And that was when DL Metal Design pretty much got created. And realistically, that's when the journey really took off.
And I guess you got busy enough that then you had to leave the other job to focus on DL Metal?
There was a little back and forth with that company, but at the end of the day, I finally went to my wife and said, listen, I think I want to do this and I want to do it right, and I'm not going to do it small. And she said, you're never going to be happy until you do it. I know it risks everything we've made over our life, but go.
You had wonderful support from your wife.
I did.
Nice. We were talking about relationships earlier, and because we're in a radio station with the morning show, and they have the man panel on every morning, talk about relationships. And Roger and I were joking around with them, kind of what side of the fence will we be on in support of marriage? I know you're a supporter.
Yes.
I know Sam's a supporter, and I know I'm a supporter. Roger, we're not sure about it. With that, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in a minute on Founders Forum.
When precision, speed, and reliability matter most, trust DL Metal Design. As a turnkey steel and glass subcontractor, we don't just meet deadlines, we beat them. With in-house production, cutting-edge technology, and seamless project management, we control the timeline to eliminate costly delays and surprises. Our design assist and 3D modeling services ensure you can visualize your final product before fabrication even begins, saving time and avoiding errors. And with over 75 years of combined industry experience, we deliver craftsmanship and accountability that you can count on. Ready to elevate your next project? Contact DL Metal Design today at dlmetaldesign.com, and let's build something exceptional.
We're back on Founders Forum with David Lopez, our guest today, and Sam Maddula is in the studio. David, I know it wasn't necessarily a straight line of growth in your company. You had a few really good years, and then I think it was 2023 you had challenges. Talk about that. What happened?
Yeah, so, like I said before, we put it pretty much all on the table, right? So, to be honest with you, the first challenge was I left the company I was with in January of 2020. So, as we all know, the pandemic happened 2 months later.
Right.
Right. So, the first thing or decision we had to make, is this the right time? And the owner of the past company said, hey, listen, with the pandemic happening, if you decide you want to stay longer, that's fine. But in my head, I said, you know what? It's the pandemic this year. It's going to be something next year. I'm just going to do this. And it worked out to be very good for us because we had no overhead, right? We were just gearing up to get things going. So that 6-month span of getting ready, we started to see industries start coming out of that pandemic shock and start moving again. So for us, we were kind of in a good spot. First year was a lot of setup, like I said. By year 2, we went from, I would say, about $500,000 in revenue that first year between actually doing work in October to January to the next year about $2.5 million.
That's phenomenal. Yeah.
And then the year after that, which would have been 22, we actually shot up to about $6.5 million in revenue. But one of the issues with that is obviously scaling. So companies have to learn, and I knew this very early, which helped us was, working capital for us is extremely important. We're in an industry that lags behind payment versus services. So, in the construction industry, you're doing work, you're financing that work until you get paid somewhere between 60 to 90 days later. So working capital is king. So for us, scaling was important, but it also meant you have to watch what you do. If you're profitable, there's one person that always looks for their cut, which is Uncle Sam. And, that was one thing we always kept in mind as well. How fast can we scale with our profits, but make sure that we can still pay our bills on time and keep a good reputation? But what happened was we scaled rapidly, smartly with money, but there was too many people wearing too many hats. So what happened was when we got so busy, production took all of our focus and sales started dwindling because we weren't focusing on sales. Right. And if you know that part of our industry, what you bid today, you get in like 6 to 12 months. Right. So if you stop 2 months here, guess what? You're going to have a 2-month lag down the road. So we started seeing that. At the same time, inflation shot through the roof. Investors, even government projects started to stall to see what was happening. Should we wait until this comes down? Because obviously the value of our money is nowhere near what it was when we started considering this project. So it was a compound effect of sales slowing because we were focused on production, inflation slowing investment, and then we saw essentially a dip, probably about 40% a dip in revenue. Well, when I saw that coming, I took that as an opportunity. I said, this is perfect, right? We've done good for, 3 years, 2.5 years at that point. I'm going to restructure the company. I can't be the sales guy and the senior PM because it's too much.
And by the way, I believe you're still profitable that year, even though
we were. We still ended. We 40% drop in revenue. We probably increased our labor costs by 30%. And we're still profitable at the end of that year.
So that set you up for the coming year.
Correct. So I took that 23 and I said, okay, focus has to go back to sales so we can continue to scale. But I'm going to take this downturn and we are going to clean this ship up so that we have the right people in the right place. So I hired a director of sales and estimating. I hired a project manager, a senior PM. We started moving some internal people into higher positions and then filling their positions. So we had this really core group of managers that could handle any department without me involved. So, in other words, if something happened to me, for argument's sake, before this restructuring, the only real answer would have been to wind the company down. Right. Whereas today, if something happens to me, we have that structure in place. The company can continue without me.
So when we last talked, I think you were on track for 2024 to do like triple what you did in 2022, I believe.
So, so right now, we went down to about $3.5 million in 23. 24 ended probably about $7.5 million, and we're projected to be closer to somewhere between $10 to $12 million company this year.
Excellent. Yeah. That's really great. So I like to ask, what strengths do you have to overcome challenges? One of the things I've seen a theme is your ability to pivot, both in 2020, again in 2022, 23. Anything else you would add to that? What kind of skills you've developed?
I mean, you can't say much about diversification, right? Because, we're not focused in one niche industry. We have private clients and we have a lot of public clients, right? One thing you can always guarantee on a public job is that you're going to get paid. Private jobs tend to be a little more profitable, happen with a little less red tape. But, if we have a 2008, you're not getting paid.
You need the public.
So we diversify that way. We also diversify what industry we're in, right? Certain industries actually shine when the economy depresses. A lot of people with a lot of money spend a lot of money when it's cheaper to get things. So that ornamental metal world actually starts ticking up when when you see prices come down. So we try to stick to different markets so you can actually see that.
Sam, you have a question for David? Oh, no?
I mean, I was just going to compliment him on the pivoting idea. That's pretty amazing. I didn't think about how, like you just said, certain things actually pivot upward when cost is cheaper. So when there's less people who have money, then you have other people who do have money on the sidelines that are going to pick up those ornamental work. That's pretty interesting to see.
And David, you've had a pretty remarkable first 5 years in business, I would say. A lot of growth, and I know you're a guy that looks forward. We talked about that earlier. If this were 10 years from today, so we're looking at it, and it's almost April of 2035, and you're looking back on the last 10 years, what would have to happen in your life? I'll ask you. I'll make it broad.
Yep.
But business, family, personally, for that to be a successful 10-year period in your life.
So, I mean, for me and my family, obviously, to see my kids, excelling in whatever career they choose. For me as a businessman, right now we're trying to position the company. So we created multiple business units that are all complements of the main business. Some are immediate cash flow versus what we're in now. So I told you it's kind of a lagging company, right? We work, we invest in the project, we don't get paid till 60, 90 days later. So I'm also looking at business units that complement that main company that are cash-based businesses. That means I build a product, you pay me, then I ship it. That immediate cash flow helps scale the larger company itself, brings in faster cash flow, and then we're trying to essentially do a conglomerate of companies under a holding company so that we are also better positioned for bank finance, right? Because that's the cheapest one.
These cash-based business units would be things like you would design products that would be sold online or in catalogs or whatever.
So some to architects, some are going to be residential based, so we can sell to, so some are business to business, some will be essentially business to customers. But all of them are essentially complements of the main company, and then we'll branch off. And
these are products that you'd have in inventory.
Absolutely.
Right. So and then you'd be ready to ship out and get paid immediately.
I'm not a steel guy trying to start a steak shop, right?
Right.
So the whole goal is take our expertise that we have now and build these additional business
You're not going back
units.
in the Quiznos business.
No.
So that's great. Anything else you'd like to add to that 10-year vision? Anything else you see? How many employees would you have in the company?
So, I mean, my goals are huge. They change over time. So the current goal in 10 years is, hopefully to be a company that's, hitting that 75, 100 million revenue between all those companies. And having them run independently with their own teams. Like I said, certain things are going to be beneficial in certain economies, others won't, but they'll all be able to support themselves. And each other. Right. So that's the goal right now, is to make the most out of what we have, labor-wise, knowledge-wise, to start these other business units and then eventually, fill those companies with additional people.
By the way, an interesting thing, so we talk about visions and we'll ask people 1 year, 3 year, 10 year. That's usually the choices.
Yep.
And it's interesting you picked 10 because, and you said it's going to change. It's going to change if it's 10 years because things are changing so rapidly now. It's almost hard to project 3 years today the way things are, because every industry is changing so rapidly. That's interesting. But it's nice that you have. But I think you have a big vision.
Very big vision.
Fulfill. It's just how you're going to get there that's going to change.
Correct. I don't think I feel very strongly if you're not looking out that far, it's really tough to make smart decisions now for where you're going to get. We recently got approached by somebody who had a very big investor that was interested in manufacturing firms. And I said, well, I'm not interested in selling, but I'll talk to you about where I want to be 10 to 15 years down the road, and maybe you can start getting me there now.
Right.
He said, well, that's great. A lot of businesses don't do that. And at the end of the day, they end up being worth a lot less because they didn't plan 10 years ahead of time. So for me, it's where that's going.
Yes, it's very interesting. It's so you don't really know what that looks like in terms of employees. You haven't filled out all the details yet.
I would say in 10 years, I want to be a 200 to 300 employee count company.
Yeah. All in the Lehigh Valley. Still keep it concentrated.
Those other business units, national. I want to be selling all over the country. Yeah.
Very interesting. It's great. What do you foresee any challenges? And of course, there's going to be challenges. Is there anything that you're seeing up front that you have to think about?
So, I mean, our core managers, we've been really good at creating that team. As you get that big, you really have to continue finding those people you trust, have the same vision as you. So culture, super important to us. I'd rather have somebody with 1 year experience that culturally fits with us than somebody who's been in the industry 25 years but knows everything and it doesn't match us.
That's a continuing theme on the show, called how important company culture is.
Absolutely.
You have, we only have a minute or two left.
Yep.
If you could speak to your younger self, David, what advice would you give you, which I imagine might apply to your kids as well?
I mean, I would say trust in yourself and do it sooner. Like, in other words, I had that opportunity after I left that first company to do what I'm doing now. But I was a little worried about, is it going to work? Can I do that? But, stability and what I'm going to, have for my family, right? They were already used to a specific life and I wanted a good life for them. But at the end of the day, trust in yourself, study, do the work. If you're a hard worker, don't waste time. And there's a lot of opportunity out there, free money, grants that people can get that I didn't really know about back then. It's because I didn't take the time to look as hard as I do now. But there's a lot of opportunity. Don't wait. Do it.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
You got it.
Out.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
Got it. Great advice. Last question. Favorite book?
I would say probably the biggest impact book on me is Good to Great. A lot of leadership information came out of that book for me, and it's kind of how I look at the way I culture my business, right? It's an amazing book.
Started as a good book, but became a great book. Anyway, that's all the time we have today on Founders Forum. So it was wonderful having you here, David. I appreciate that you traveled down here from the Lehigh Valley to Florida for the show. You as well, Sam. Thank you both, and thank you all for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again. I don't know if we'll see you. You'll see us soon. We'll be on video soon. Anyway, next week, and have a great week.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Thank you for having me as a guest. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed your time with Founders Forum and that you found value to take with you throughout your day. Join us again next week for another episode of Founders Forum on WXKB 1039 HD2. Sponsored by Mark J. Bernstein. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or Beasley Media Group.